Okay, let's go ahead and get started, man. You ready?
I am. Let's go.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. Today we are going to discuss email security, specifically for the SLED audience. We recognize, and we were discussing around, that there's a whole lot of vendor presentations and stuff out there, but not a whole lot of vendor agnostic, best practice focused opportunities for continuing education credits. And so email security being such a huge issue, we decided to put this together. So what we have today is exactly that. This is a vendor agnostic discussion on best practices around email security with some state and local education flavor. I'm Andy Bennett. I've been in security for many years. I was formerly the deputy CISO for the state of Texas, and so I know exactly the type of struggles facing the state and local government space. And Isam, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you, Andy. So Isam here. I'm the head of sales engineering at Valamail. We're a provider of email security, specializing in DKIM, SPF, and DMARC. And basically, we're here to answer some of your questions and give you best practices. Also, my background is kind of DevOps and IT, so I kind of understand, similar to Andy, kind of what your struggles and challenges are, and can talk to that.
Fantastic. So you see here the agenda. We're gonna discuss email security in general. We're just gonna open up with a discussion back and forth, couple educational items, and also why education is so imperatively crucial for securing this space. We're going to cover the technical details of DMARC, DKIM, and SPF, but not necessarily in that order. And we're going to try to break down the recipe for that buzzword soup, because too often these are things people have heard of but not thought about doing. We're going to talk about some places where some of these things might have saved some government entities from some really bad days, and also discuss tips and tricks on how to make it work, and provide you with some tools that are free to use that you can use to validate and or test your current settings and protections. So we're going to talk through a couple things here. This is a nice boring slide that's intended to drive some discussion for Isam and I. And so the first question is why is email security critical? And I've got opinions, but Isam, give me your practitioner's approach, and you're very close to the space because you work in email every day. But why is email security critical? And I'd like to add some flavor to that. How do I demonstrate that it's critical? How do I speak to the criticality to leadership? Because those are the ones with the purse strings.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Email and email security in particular is critical. Oh, why? Because based on what we see on a day-to-day basis and data out there as well from different studies, 90 to 95% of kind of cybersecurity attacks start with an email. It's either business email compromise, where invoices or writing numbers or whatnot are being sent to your finance department or some people in critical positions. The hackers know you, the phishers and the spammers and all that know these organizations, and they target them with business email compromise. They do phishing for credentials or network password resets and things like that, right? So it starts with email. Email is still critical. Security of that infrastructure is key. There's lots of solutions out there, and we'll talk through them, but every company needs to implement all kinds of different measures from SEGs and other filters and sandboxing and things like that to ensure that their infrastructure, not just inbound, but also outbound and at a global level, is protected.
So I heard it put the most succinctly I've ever heard it put earlier this year, that every user has access and every attacker wants it. And that's the answer to the question of why would they target me. But when you bring email into that equation, what is the one thing that almost every user in every organization has access to? What is the one thing, the common tie that binds the CEO to the janitor and every position in between in an organization? It's email. email has become the communication medium for organizations, for official communication, for party communication, for friend communication, for unofficial communication, for coordination of teams, for processing of invoices, and it's the critical underpinning and foundation for the business, whether we like it or not. And that's why it's critical. So business email compromise, BEC, if you say, when you use the word compromise to an executive, their eyes already start to roll in their heads. So we say BEC, business email compromise. Now, BEC isn't always hacking, is it? And I say hacking with air quotes. Just
yeah, no, it's not. And as far as BEC is concerned, you're not actually going in and hacking their infrastructure and network to get this data. A lot of it is, like I said, emails that target certain individuals in key positions for either financial data and or having them do financial transactions with banks and routing numbers and things like that. So it's not really hacking in that traditional sense of, I got to get through the firewall. Well, actually, you don't need to get through a firewall here. Email is open. Like you said, everybody has access to email. All I need to do is send you the right email from the right person with the right data that you're expecting, and you're probably going to take action on it without knowing that you're compromising your company and your position.
absolutely. Well, and it's our internal communications are in email. Our external communications are in email. We use it to reach and manage our third parties, but we also connect to third parties to send email on our behalf, right? So business email compromise, business email represents an entire spectrum of things, and without the right security, without the right standards in place too, because it's not all fancy security tools. A lot of times security can be achieved or at least improved by just adhering to a standard. So, for example, using an email distribution service, I'm being very careful to be vendor agnostic here, but using an email distribution service and a marketing platform or a marketing platform, you you have to be very careful that you don't end up on a blacklist from your domain, or that your emails actually, when you're using one of these third-party services, that your emails actually end up in the inboxes that you're targeting. Because without adhering to the standards, without having the security, frequently your communications could end up right in the junk box. And we're going to talk about that a little more, but the statistics, there's truth, lies, and then there's statistics, or lies, damn lies, and statistics, I think is actually how it goes. And so saying 95% of all threats come in via email, or even if it's 75, and even if it's 100% start with an email, the boogeyman out there is ransomware, and a whole bunch of those attacks, those ransomware attacks, come in. They start as an attempt at phishing, which we'll talk about phishing hard on the next slide. There's an attempted phishing, and it's successful, and somebody clicks the link. It's always somebody clicked the thing, right? So ransomware is the boogeyman. But what's really crazy is, despite ransomware doing now hundreds of billions of dollars a year in damage, business email compromise accounts for 2 orders of magnitude larger damage globally than ransomware. The difference is that it does it by 1,000 cuts, as opposed to hard hitting and taking down an organization. And so frequently business email compromise, even though per attack can cost millions of dollars, frequently the most common type of business email compromise is where they redirect a business process, which redirects a payment. And that payment, then you still owe that money. You still have to pay your vendor. So whatever money you sent to the bad guy, you still have to pay to the person you owed the money to. And so it doubles the cost of whatever thing you were buying. And then there's data security. What's the one place where our data are all gathered and collated together? It's email, right? So Isam, what's the distinction for you between, we're talking about business processes being run through email, we're talking about critical incidents being started by email. What about data security? What's the special flavor and story around data security for you vis-a-vis email?
Yeah, I mean, what you said is absolutely true. We're sharing everything, privileged information, privileged data. We're sharing documentation, everything within within email, and that's a lot of our or companies' internal confidential data. So with having access to email, with having email or not having the right security in place, or all the security measures and following the standards with regards to email security, you're opening that channel to anybody to kind of breach it and get to your precious, valuable, confidential data and damage it, right? Because a lot of this data is kind of intellectual property, right? So you're pretty much opening that up if you're not having the right security measures in place.
Well, to bring that story around home to the current audience, though, that intellectual property is yours and my identity. It's the citizens, it's the constituents, and it's those folks to whom government services are delivered and provided for. And it's not just, we're not talking about somebody stealing the patent for a widget. We're talking about somebody stealing the lives of Texans, the lives of Californians, the lives of every American potentially. And we've seen massive attacks on the private sector that have exposed that, but we've also seen that exact same type of attack hit government. We actually just saw a web-based attack that exposed millions of teachers' addresses and information publicly that made the news that I won't go into because I have very, very strong feelings about it. And we're recording. So all of those things above, the bad guys are using phishing. So just because we know and we take for granted that we understand what phishing is, there's phishing, there's vishing, there's smishing. Talk to us about the social engineering that goes into phishing.
Oh, attackers are smart, and so don't kind of belittle them or underestimate them, right? They're targeting you, targeting your organization. They know you. They know what you're, the different people are, all of that. They actually learning all of that because they're sending appropriate messages, socially engineered messages that don't contain any kinds of malware, ransomware, whatever it is that could be triggered by maybe a gateway security or whatnot. This is a socially engineered email that will pretty much pass through any type of security measure because it's not triggering anything. But again, that email is targeting you. They know you. They understand who you are. That you're their target. Whatever your position is, the hierarchy in your organization. They've actually studied all of that, and they're using that knowledge to send you those targeted phishing, socially engineered messages that get to you, for you to take action on it or interact with them from that perspective, whether it's for email or payment routing or credentials or anything else like that.
Well, and I will say it's even easier to target a government agency than it is to target an average organization because a huge amount of the information they need to gather to target an organization is freely available as public record. Who the leaders of the organization are, freely available. What's the budget of the organization? Transparent government. How much money do you spend and with whom? Transparent government. It's all out there. And almost every state has a public information law that allows for, and should, I think, allows for the public to see and hold accountable the government for the money being spent. But that also means that we have to be even more careful for these types of attacks in government. And we have to have a focus on training and stay focused on the human element. No matter how often we talk about the technical controls, this is where people and systems meet. So let's move on. I think we've laid a good foundation for the discussion. Let's talk about something a little more technical, and that is, there's email security has come a long way. Perspectives on email security have come a long way, and this is, you can't catch a new fish with an old trap, and replace fish with mouse. Is there a perfect mousetrap? No, there's not a perfect mousetrap, but there's definitely a lot of ways you can drive the mouse to the trap. And so when you look at this slide, what I see are a whole bunch of cumbersome processes, each of which sure has value, because if we stop doing some of these things, the bad guys will just revert to the thing we're no longer watching. And the thing I always think of when I see this is we got really good at watching for textual-based phishing emails in the mid-2000s. We got really good at it. So what happened next? They just stopped putting text in and switched to a JPEG image of like click here to get your prescription filled and stuff like that. So instead of just writing out what the scam was, they turned it into a picture. So what's your take? What's the slide say to you?
This slide, the take is really, you got to stay ahead of the game, because hackers are staying, or attackers are staying ahead of the game. They look at what methods that were used in the past that now there's technical solutions for. They want to try the new thing. A lot of these systems or kind of jargon here that we have talks about kind of existing data, right? We're talking about IP reputation. That means that somebody actually had to send something so for it to start getting some bad reputation, right? To be logged. What if this is the first time this is happening, right? Then that system that you have in place that depends on IP reputation, depends on blacklisting. It's all depending on historical data. So that's not, that's not enough. You need more. You need to stay on top of it. You need to understand what attackers are using and deploy the different methods and security technologies that are out there to help you with that. You should have the whole arsenal from a email security perspective. You should have your SEGs doing all the right things with regard to content filtering and sandboxing and whatnot, integrated within IP reputation and blacklist systems and all of that. In addition to what we're going to talk about today with DMARC, SPF, and DKIM, and other solutions that look at emails coming in from lookalikes and cousin domains and open signups and all of that. This is really a whole ecosystem of security that you got to build to ensure that you catch most of the stuff that's coming into your departments or organizations.
Well, I think that it dovetails nicely into the next slide, which is a little brief timeline of the history of email security. And what everything on the previous slide had in common is that at its core, they were all content focused. They were all watching for a specific type of thing. Whereas if you can stop the stuff from ever getting into the inbox, you don't even have to fight that fight. And the bad guys realized, the threat actors realized that those other protections are very effective in the things that they do. Watching for malware, we're good at that. But if we can trick somebody into thinking we are somebody we're not, it's only a matter of time till we can get them to click that thing. If we can trick somebody into thinking that we are somebody that we're not, or that we have a legitimate reason for communicating, that they frequently don't lead with the malware. They don't lead with the bad thing to click. They develop trust. They conduct actual business sometimes, a couple times. They'll build the trust, they'll groom the victim, and then they will launch the attack. They'll take advantage. Sometimes it's just a matter of patience. After the SolarWinds attack, I heard somebody reference patience as the new TTP because they were so low and so slow. Well, it turns out that the folks that are focused on email as the attack vector, they've known that TTP for a long time. And now that they've pivoted to identity away from content, it's time to add more tools to the toolkit. And it's not just a matter of bolting on a vendor. It's a matter of maturing the approach. What do you think?
No, absolutely. I mean, all the technologies that we have out there is great for handling the spams, the malware, the AI ML that does the kind of heuristics on messages to see if they're good or bad or whatnot. But identity deception, that's where kind of the new threat vector that is predominant now, because again, a lot of it is socially engineered, a lot of it is written in such a way that will pass all these different heuristics and so on. And really the idea is to implement systems in place that take care of DMARC, SPF, and DKIM, for example, to, which is one method to protect against identity. And there's other solutions as well, as I mentioned earlier, with regards to the open signups and the lookalikes and cousin domain and things like that.
Absolutely, the typo squatting folks and stuff like that. Excuse me. Well, so I'm always hesitant to say, well, there's this new fancy thing, because we're not actually talking about stuff that is like brand spanking new, right? Identity attacks have been around for a long time. Email security has been a concern since they started off email. Since the first time somebody sent an unwanted email, people were like, well, how do I stop that from happening? And even we're seeing a whole lot of legacy systems now being abused in new and innovative ways, like all the spam calls for car warranties that we're getting, right? That's phishing. That's voice phishing, voice-based. They're trying to get you to click something with your brain, and eventually they're going to try to get you over to a portal like this, or they're going to send you a link in your text messages because you validated the phone number and you've shown interest. They'll send you a link and say, here's that place where you can update your warranty. We just need this sensitive personal information, and you're good to go. So standards, I'm a big fan of standards, and there's a standard that we're going to talk about next, which is SPF, the Sender Policy Framework. And I'd like you to walk us through, because you're the subject matter expert here. Walk us through how SPF works and what an organization gets out of deploying it. And I will say, I'll open with, this is not something you have to pay somebody to do unless you just don't have the bandwidth to do it. This is something that can be done upfront in your own DNS and can be handled. But Isam, lead the way, man.
Absolutely. So SPF, what is SPF? It's a standard 15 plus years old, came out kind of when first they started thinking about email security. What it does is basically defines a text record in your DNS that says, hey, these are the IP addresses of all the servers that are authorized to send email as my domain. It's as simple as that. So it's a list of IPs of servers, like on-premise servers, relays, or your Office 365 or whatnot. But it's just as simple as a list of IPs that you publish on your DNS that says these IP addresses can send email as my domain. It really is that simple. And then how it works is that when you send a message, or one of your systems that's authorized to send a message as you, sends that message out, that message gets to a receiver's gateway. That receiver's gateway, or MTA, checks the SPF record of the return path of the message that's in the header. So keep in mind that a message has kind of hidden headers, and then what you see in the message. So keep that in mind, and because that will come in kind of very handy when I talk about DMARC and what it fixes. But the domain that it actually looks at is the domain in the return path. So it looks at that domain in the header, says, oh, yep, this is XYZ company. So let me go to their DNS, check if this IP address is part of their list of authorized senders. If it is, great, this message passes SPF. If it's not, then hey, this message does not pass SPF, right? So really as simple as that.
Well,
now,
and what happens to it if it doesn't pass?
If it doesn't pass, great question, thank you. If it doesn't pass, the message at that point, two things happen. One, there is a part of the SPF standard is you define kind of what happens to that message from a passing perspective. So there's a -all that you can add to the message that says, oh, yep, hey, if this message fails, basically block it, right? And then within your gateway, you also have to, that's kind of the second method, is you tell your gateway how to, or there's measures within your gateway to say what to do with messages that fail SPF authentication, or fail or pass SPF authentication, right? So a lot of these measures, some of them, just say, oh yeah, just move it to the spam box or whatnot, but you're really dependent on the configurations within those gateways to say what happens to those messages. Some of them just end up in the inbox regardless, right? Because there isn't really that much of a strong enforcement from that perspective.
Yeah, and you have to remember to turn the enforcement on and use it. And it's also only one piece of the puzzle. I worked with an organization earlier this year that had a business email compromise that was largely driven by emails that would have landed in the spam folder if SPF had just been turned on. And it ended up costing them a fairly significant portion of their revenue. It was a private sector company. It cost them a fairly significant portion of their revenue because they're a small company, and that money was gone. And like I said at the beginning, they still owed the vendor that the payment was due for. Another thing that happens in these scenarios is the business cycle kicks in. And so they thought they had paid the bill, and the receiving provider has net 30 or net 60 terms with the payee, and so with the payor. And so they didn't even send a notice of non-payment for 90 days. They went through the normal period. They gave them a 30-day grace, and they didn't reach out for payment until 90 days. And so that money had already been gone for 90 days by the time the organization found out. And it's not recoverable. In these kinds of transactions, the money is pretty much only recoverable in the first couple days. They move it so fast, and if you aren't not on top of this, if you don't have the processes in your organization built in to identify these things, and those are people-centric processes, by the way, because if the email has already failed, you have to rely on people and business processes to correct this. But that money was gone. So let's move on to DKIM. I think DKIM is next.
Yeah.
And
so one thing I do want to mention about
yeah.
SPF, don't think about it as a silver bullet, right?
It's not.
It has limitations. That's why we're talking about all three standards together. Limitations, there's lookup limits and things like that, and record size limits from a DNS perspective. And also something that DMARC will highlight is that it looks at the return path and not the from address that you see in the message. So there's lots of limitations to it. That's why just implementing SPF actually does not cover you from spoofing. So keep that in mind. You need it, but it does not cover you from spoofing.
One piece of the puzzle. So let's look at the second piece. Tell us how these things fit together. What is domain keys identified email?
All right, DKIM. What is DKIM? Well, it is another standard from an authentication perspective. It validates that a message is authentic, came out of a particular sender that's authorized to send as you because they signed it with the private key that they have to sign for you. So it's the authenticity of a message that it has not been altered since it was sent from the sender to the receiver. If any elements of it get altered, whether it's the the subjects or the bodies or whatnot, then it'll fail that kind of authentication. So what it does basically is how DKIM works is there's two keys, a public key and a private key. The public key you put as a text record in your DNS for any provider that you might be using to send email as you, right? The private key stays on that provider's server. So because it needs it to sign messages. So as messages are being sent out, it looks at certain things. As you can see in this example, it tells you, what the headers that it's gonna sign, and then the body that it's gonna sign, and then it create a hash of that. And that hash data, or that mathematical hash or equation, gets put in the header and gets sent as part of the email. When the receiving MTA receives that and sees those in the hidden headers that you don't see and in the visible message, it checks against the domain, grabs the public key, and then uses that to decipher if the message has been altered. Because if the hash does not compute with what's in the headers, then it says, yep, either subject or body or whatnot gets altered. One thing I do want to mention here, a lot of the times, as you are setting up your gateways and things like that, a lot of the emails that you get in or get sent to you or whatnot, you might add like word like external, or add some additional content to the body that says, oh, hey, be aware this message came out of from the source outside of the organization. A lot of companies like to do that and do that, but keep in mind that doing editing of the subjects or the bodies makes DKIM fail because you just altered the message. So just keep that in mind as you're working through these types of securities. Okay.
Yeah, you got to do things in the right order, right?
Absolutely. So check DKIM out at your gateway before you edit any of the any of the content and put it in the and route it to the inbox of any of your users.
Absolutely. And take action if it's failing, right? Don't forget to allow the enforcement. That's something a lot of folks have these things configured, but they're using them passively and not going back and leveraging the enforcement capabilities of each feature. And they stack on top of each other.
Absolutely.
So go ahead and walk us through this.
Yeah, DKIM. Yeah, I mean, there's still, again, it's not the silver bullet. It's an authentication method to say, yep, is this message authentic? Has it been edited or not along the path? It's not a silver bullet. Why? Because again, it does not look for or compare the DKIM domain where the signature actually came from and resides to the actual from address that you see in the visible message. So I can still send a spoofed email with a visible from as any of your domains if they're not protected and have it signed from my domain, right? And it'll pass DKIM because, again, there's no comparison or enforcement of something we call alignment, that the DKIM domain and the from address have to be of the same domain. So any spoofer or attacker can spoof your domain if you're just using DKIM with no DMARC.
So, and I will say the natural question that people ask when they hear that is, well, why didn't we just develop something that worked from the ground up? And the answer to that is because that timeline that we already saw, this threat has evolved over time, as most cyber threats do. And in that evolution, we've had to find new solutions to problems we didn't know existed to start with. We didn't know that people would discover and choose to abuse these systems in the ways they are. And there wasn't, as we all know in the security community, there wasn't a focus on trying to guess or threat model how the threat actors, the bad guys, would try to abuse systems to come at us and circumvent normal flow, normal control. I mean, why would you ever send an improper email? That's not what it's for, right? So that has led to they move, they find a new way to abuse, and we have to solve the problem, which is part of that debate of they get to innovate and we have to react. And so if anybody comes up with a silver bullet that is truly innovative and gets ahead of that next one and unifies these things, you will be a winner.
And again, SPF alone is not a silver bullet. DKIM alone is not a silver bullet. They're still open for spoofing.
Well, I'll even say that when we do the whole stack, the whole SPF, DKIM, and DMARC stack, it's still not a silver bullet, but it's 1,000 times better than we started. There's always room for other tools, other innovations, and no substitution for training. But after we have SPF, after we have DKIM, DMARC is next. So walk us through what DMARC adds to the stack.
All right. So absolutely. DMARC came after, of course, SPF and DKIM because they realized we're still open. Hackers and attackers are still spoofing us because we're checking against their domains instead of our domains, and they can still send emails as us. So that's where DMARC came into play. DMARC did a couple of things. One is gave you visibility, right? Because today you're using multiple systems. This is not just about your gateway. This is not about your internal relays and systems that you own and manage. This is about all the third-party senders that you're using for payment systems and marketing and whatever else you might be using. They're sending email with a from address as you. You don't know where those messages are coming from, or if there's an attack happening or a spoof, a spike and spoof against your domain at a global level, because this is not just about emails coming into your organization. This is emails going to your vendors, partners, citizens, right? everybody. So it gave you visibility. So in the DMARC standard, there's an address that sends you the DMARC reports. 2, it gave you enforcement and added that alignment factor, right? What I talked about earlier as far as SPF and DKIM, they check against the return path or the D of the DKIM, but don't care about the from address in the message. DMARC cares about that. DMARC says, these 2 domains have to be the same. This is kind of what we call alignment. So the D and the DKIM signature that's in the hidden header and the return path have to be aligned to the from address that you see in the message. If it's aligned, it will pass DMARC. If it's not aligned, it will fail DMARC. But in this failure scenario, SPF passed and DKIM passed. DMARC failed because it's not aligned. So that's what spoofers are depending on. If you don't have DMARC, is hey, we can make it pass by SPF. We can make it pass by a DKIM without you even caring about it. But DMARC, and that's why you need to enforce DMARC or enable DMARC, is enforces that alignment factor to make sure that all these have to be of the same domain. Whether if you're checking them for it to pass. Okay.
So it does sound like a silver bullet. We've said it's not. What keeps agencies, what keeps organizations from getting to being able to take action on these malicious emails that that reduce our attack surface to only actual legitimate emails? Why don't we get it done?
So with the visibility that it gives you, all these visibility reports are their XML reports, and you get thousands and thousands and thousands of them. So trying to sift through them, analyze them, understand what those IP addresses that are sending as you are, and whether they're supposed to be legitimate or not, depending on your size. And in most SLED organizations, it's large, right? You got lots of senders sending as you from an internal perspective and third-party services perspective, and bad actors as well, and trying to sift through that and to identify if these are real services that you should authenticate and configure for SPF and DKIM, or they're not, right? So that has, is a challenge. And typically in big organizations, you want to use a solution that helps you ingest and analyze that data. Also, the limitations with the standards, right? I mentioned SPF has, the 10 lookup limit, where you add too many includes in your SPF records that have IP addresses in them, and it does DNS lookups on those includes. If those includes go above 10 from a recursive perspective as well, SPF authentication starts failing. So even though you have an include in your SPF record, it might still fail because of some of these restrictions that were built into the standard. Keep in mind, the standard was over 15 years ago. And back then, there weren't that many third-party senders out there from an online perspective that you use and send email as you. Back then, you barely had a gateway or whatnot that sent as you. So 10 made sense. Plus, they also worried about any kind of DDoS types attacks from a DNS perspective if you open that up to be unlimited, right? So, but in today's age, this is very restrictive. So having to deal with that, having to manage SPF, DMARC, and DKIM, and all the restrictions that they might have from a manual perspective, those are some of the challenges as well. Also, dealing with your DNS, right? DNS is very brittle, right? You don't want to be adding the wrong values or typos or things like that. You're going to be breaking your zone files, and that's even worse than just having a broken SPF record, right? So especially with like universities or big counties and states where you have multiple departments and organizations that are sending email using third-party services, you're dealing with lots and lots of records and updates to add SPF, DKIM, and DMARC records for those to ensure that it authenticates properly. So all that is a lot of work. And again, ensuring
it's intimidating.
A little bit, yes.
Yeah, it's
If you're doing
intimidating.
it
So
by yourself, it can be. It depends on your size and things like that. But in most SLED organizations, they're pretty big. I mean, universities, we typically see them using between 30 and 50 different senders across all different departments that they have. Imagine having to configure all of that from a tool perspective and a DNS perspective for SPF and DKIM. That's a lot of work, and that continues to change, right? You're going to keep onboarding new third-party services in the different organizations and departments. So that continuous work it's a lot. It's intimidating to some extent, and that's why people just say, "Oh, you know what? I'm not going to deal with it." Right?
that's right.
Wrong.
And
You need to deal
unfortunately,
with it. This is serious business, right? This is a method that gets you to protect against these types of impersonations, and you want to implement. And there are tools and solutions out there that help you with that. So don't feel intimidated or discouraged by the amount of data and what I'm talking about here. There's definitely solutions, and you should use them.
so I think that brings up a great point for the SLED audience, is that while there are solutions, but there's solutions for every single issue out there. There's point solutions to solve a problem all over the place. So I think first we need to be very clear that all three of these things are physically doable by each individual organization, and they're kind of in order of effort. SPF is the lowest hanging fruit, DKIM is next, and DMARC can be pretty hard. In small organizations, which there are a lot of small state and local agencies out there. There are some cities where City Hall is manned by one person. There are some agencies that have 11 people total. And so the bandwidth and or the expertise may not be there to get these things set up. And that's where it frequently doesn't happen. The next thing is that my experience is that there's oftentimes not the right people in the meetings to adequately explain the need. And so for those of you out there who are looking for, well, this is obviously important and we don't have the bandwidth either to manage the workload because we're huge, or the expertise because we're a small team and we partially outsource, or we have a set it and forget it need, because we don't have the team bandwidth to take care of it. Uh, it's important to bring the right people into the discussion when building the strategy. So the security department should not be strategizing on SPF, DKIM, and DMARC without bringing in the email team, without talking to the email team, without discussing the IT concerns, because frequently DNS security is often housed in security, tools that are watching for DNS-based threats. But DNS itself, DNS management, usually lives in an operational area. And given that all of these email protections that are these standards are critical to modern security here to validate these messages, they live in and around DNS. And so this is a multi-team effort. And I think that gets lost in the decision-making process and is something that is a non-technical hurdle that keeps it from working. But once it does work, and I apparently wasn't on the right screen to change the slide. Once it does work, this is how we make it work. Sam, walk us through this diagram real quick.
Absolutely. So, like I mentioned, yeah, every organization is using 10, 20, 30, 50 different providers that are sending us you. Plus, you got the bad actors. So all these are third-party services. So once you have SPF, DKIM, DMARC implemented the right way with enforcement, and actually, I forgot to mention one thing about DMARC from a policies perspective. So DMARC, there's three policies involved with DMARC. One is none, which you just put in the record, and what that will give you is give you visibility. So you don't have a policy, messages will still make it through. Passing or failing doesn't matter at that point. It's just giving you the visibility to know what's happening with your domain. But once you're at enforcement, meaning one of the policies of either quarantine or reject, where quarantine messages that fail SPF or DKIM and DKIM, not or, and DKIM will go into the spam folder of the user, or the reject policy where a message, if it fails SPF and DKIM, it'll actually get rejected outright by the gateway. right? So it doesn't even end up in any inbox or spam box. So the user doesn't have any chance of taking action on it, right? So these are the enforcement policies, the quarantine and rejects. Once you're at those policies and you have SPF and DKIM implemented properly for all your third-party services, then any of those services sending email as you, the receiving gateway gets those messages, checks your SPF record on your DNS, checks if it has a DKIM, and they'll get the public DKIM key if it has one on your DNS, and then checks DMARC, right? Because it says, yep, did it pass SPF? Yes. Did it pass DKIM? Yes or no, doesn't matter at that point, because for DMARC, only one of those authentication methods have to pass. If it passes either one of them, then DMARC passes. And when it passes, that means it's a trusted message. It's a message that came from a source that you authorized. It could be any of those sources, right? Now, if it came from a different source, like a bad actor from one of those Eastern Bloc countries or whatnot, then you can, it'll fail SPF because that IP address that's sent as you is not in your SPF record. They will not have a DKIM signature that you own or anything like that. So it will fail SPF and DKIM, hence it'll fail DMARC, and those messages will end up either in quarantine or reject, depending on what your policy is for your domain. So that's really how, once you implement DMARC the right way with SPF and DKIM, good makes it through, bad or unauthorized gets blocked, and that's what you want. That's how you protect your employees, your citizens, because this MTA doesn't mean this is just your gateway at the SLED level. This is any gateway that receives an email, that's with a from address as your domain, right? It will, if it has DMARC enforced, this is kind of the flow that will happen, and this is how it will protect the recipients from those fake messages or unauthorized messages coming out as your domains.
I would also say, don't forget the nightmare scenario. These threat actors know that we use these services. These are all common. They can sign up for demo versions of these services with a typo squatted domain and be gone at the end of that 30-day free trial, but still have been sending your organization or as your organization if you haven't got these things covered. So let's talk about some things you can do. If you don't know where you stand right now, you can go check out the MX Toolbox Super Tool. It's one of my favorites, and it's free for use. You can learn more than you ever wanted to know about your public-facing environment, your email records, your DNS settings, whether or not you have properly configured SPF, DMARC, and DKIM. If you're interested in that, check out mxtoolbox.com's approach to providing you information. If you need to scare your leadership, there's a tool that looks like it was built in Windows 95, because if I'm not mistaken, the first version was called JB Mail. JB Mail, you can get it at pc-tools.net. JB Mail is a very old email sending tool, and it's a client based on the earliest standards, and it has been updated with new protocols, but it's based on the earliest standards and allows you to set each characteristic of the email you're sending, and therefore allows you to send very elegantly spoofed emails. Give it a try. Send it to your own, use the tool and send it to your own inbox. It's enlightening, and it helps you really tell the story, because after you've learned how to use the tool, you can also send it to anyone else's inbox. And then of course, Issam's got a domain checker there that you can use to validate your DMARC. You can go to that tool, type in your URL, and validate your DMARC settings, and find out if you are protected. Find out if enforcement is turned on. Find out where you stand with regards to this stuff. These three tools are a heck of a toolkit to show you the total health of your email approach. And I would encourage you to go check them out. I think we have time for one horror story real quick, Issam. You have a story about a university that had Well, they had an email incident with their alumni association. You want to share that real quick?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. So without having DMARC on, anybody can spoof you, right? So keep that in mind. And the first thing you need to do is just get visibility on, and that last URL that you have there will help you understand if you have visibility, you have DMARC on, or if you have SPF problems, right? Because they'll do that for you. But that university didn't have DMARC on. I was actually at a Gartner conference when the CISO came running to our booth and said, "Hey, I need to talk to you guys. I have a problem. The alumni subdomain got spoofed, and thousands of emails were going out to alumni that were racist, bigotry, whatever. Right? That was basically affecting, its bad reputation for this large university." So we worked with the CISO and all of that, and got them to take DMARC seriously. I mean, they took DMARC very seriously. They instituted a project very quickly to ensure that DMARC gets implemented and so on. But as you can see, I mean, reputation. It's not just about financial loss. Reputation loss or whatnot also can affect that, and can affect financial loss, because alumni now are not satisfied with the university, with the security measures that this university has, right? So keep that in mind. And by the way, working with that university, we were able to get them to enforcement within 4 months. Now, universities are, as a lot of who are from SLED, are very complex environments. But even that, it didn't take that long to get them to enforcement. There's lots of organizations and departments that we need to work with and get their SPF, DKIM, DMARC implemented, so they get protected, so this kind of situation does not happen again.
Well, I will say never let a good disaster go to waste. And so if you have an incident, don't forget to use it to push your agenda there as well. And there's a number of horror stories out there. There are stories about payments being redirected for construction projects. Construction projects are massively expensive. Losing a $3 million payment to a contractor that you will still owe afterwards, that's massive, and has happened repeatedly. Losing hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of payments to a vendor at a small local government, huge. That is massive. That is budget breaking and career ending for city administrators. It is the kind of thing, and it's not even because they get blamed. It's because the budget is now gone to pay their salary. It's the kind of thing that just really is avoidable, and we have to get better as a security community in communicating how and why this needs to be a priority. Whether we roll our own or whether we go with a vendor solution that helps us automate our way out of the problem, it doesn't matter. It needs to get done. So with that, we're just about out of time. And if we have any questions,
we do.
Yeah, there's a couple on the chat, you guys.
So
okay. I'll stop sharing so I can see that.
Yeah. So Cedric asked a question about tagging or labeling, especially when we're talking about DKIM. Will that affect the body of the message and the authentication of DKIM? In Office, if you're talking about Office 365 specifically, it depends on which type of tagging or labeling you're doing. There is a specific tagging feature of Office 365 that doesn't affect the content of the message. If this is just adding a label, then yes, it will edit the message and hence will fail DKIM. But keep in mind, as long as you're doing the DKIM checking before adding these labels or tags, then you should be, the message will pass DKIM, and then you can add whatever tag you want afterwards.
Hey Cedric, in that I see that question of where would they sit in that diagram you saw, where we had the 1, 2, and 3 with the mail receiver / MTA in the middle of the circle. The provider would sit in that cloud piece up above with the gears.
But from a monitoring perspective, though, if this is not configuration, so there's different types of solutions. There's monitoring solutions that will not actually be in that diagram, because where it would be is the MTA at that point will send a report at the end of the day to that monitoring solution. So it's not checking your DNS, because that cloud is your DNS for SPF, DMARC, and DKIM. No, it checks your DMARC, sees an email address where you want to send these reports, and then the MTA at that point generates that XML report, and then sends it over to that monitoring solution. Now, if you're using a solution that also is hosting your SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, that's where they take over that cloud on top of that diagram.
And then Jan or Jan, I'm sorry, I don't know what the right pronunciation is. Is it because of DMARC we have spams and undesirable emails? First of all, it's because of bad guys. It's because of threat actors sending those things. But DMARC will help reduce the volume of those things you get. The implementing these 3 standards will help you reduce that volume and allow you to focus. It is not because of DMARC. It's because of a lack of these 3 standards in place in most organizations that that we still continue to see these things end up in our inbox. And then, as Issam said, there's no substitution for a secure email gateway, an SEG. He said SEG a few times, but that stands for Secure Email Gateway. And then each of our modern mail providers also has a number of tools that allow you to help filter the content and whatnot. So these standards allow you to sort the majority of the offenders right out of the gate, and those other tools help really finish the job.
Absolutely. And then there's a question from Oscar: is BIMI records irrelevant and important in addition to SPF, DKIM, and DMARC? So BIMI is not really kind of a security standard on its own from that perspective. I think it's kind of an addition. You have to be a DMARC enforcement to be able to utilize BIMI. What is BIMI? So BIMI is really a standard that allows you to show your logo in the messages, right? It's adopted by Google. It's adopted by Yahoo. So when you send messages, you have a DNS record that basically has a URL of where your logo is. Your logo has to be trademarked. There has to be a certificate on it, so not everybody can kind of impersonate it. So it's an additional level of kind of to show trust. It's like putting a trust mark on a message. That, yeah, hey, I am at enforcement. This is my logo, so trust it a little more. But as itself, it's really not a, I don't consider it a security standard. It's more kind of a here's an additional trust level and marketing tool, because now you're showing your logos in the messages that the recipients are getting. And I think that was it for questions.
I think that was it. So I'm just going to share my screen one last time here real quick and say, this is us, guys. If we can be of assistance, if there's anything we can do for you, this is how you get us. I'm Andy at Apollo-IS. He's Issam.Bendik@valleymail.com. Please let us know how we can help. Our goal is to help organizations improve, and that's why we are working on these CPE series, because having the vendor-free best practice discussion is what will advance it. If we can help, let us know. But otherwise, I hope the information was useful and helps you improve your security.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. And like Andy said, you have my email. If you have any questions about SPF, DMARC, DKIM, and just email security in general, reach out anytime and let us know.
And if you need anything else, you've got mine. Have a great day, guys, and see you on the next one. Thanks, Issam.
Oh, thank you, Andy.